Good morning. Would you open your Bibles to Mark chapter 8? Mark chapter 8 is where we will be this morning as we think about the Lord's Supper as a weekly antidote to worry. Mark 8 has, to me, one of the most fascinating miracles that Jesus performed. In Mark 8, verses 22 through 26. In verse 22, it says, "They came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, 'Do you see anything?' And he looked up and said, 'I see men, for I see them like trees walking around.' Then again, he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored, and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, 'Do not enter the village.'" Now, the first fascinating thing about this miracle is that Jesus spits on this guy's eyes, which, in our culture, we would think is A, absolutely disgusting, okay, and then B, disrespectful. And there were some contexts, of course, where spitting on somebody would be disrespectful. Later, of course, the soldiers spit on Jesus, okay, as an insult. But from a healing perspective, in the ancient world, they believed saliva had healing properties. And, they were kind of right about that. It has soothing properties, but not really necessarily healing. And certainly spitting on someone's eyes wouldn't make a blind man see. Okay, but this would not have been quite as horrific, right, as it would be for us if someone spat in our face. And of course, Jesus could have healed him any way he wanted, right? He could snap his fingers. He didn't have to spit on his eyes. But the suggestion is that this would have been more personal. It would have been more intimate, and he lays his hands on him too. Remember, this guy is blind, so he can't really see what's happening. And so Jesus uses very tactile ways to show him, I'm with you, I care about you, and putting your saliva on somebody, that's a pretty close, intimate sort of an act there. But the reason this miracle really fascinates me is because it's the only miracle Jesus ever performed in two stages. Normally, when Jesus heals someone, it works fully and it works immediately. Okay, but in the case of this blind man, it seems like his healing was only partial at first. He was blind and couldn't see anything at all before, but now he can see. It's just, he's not really sure what he's seeing. He says, "I see men around me," which makes sense because he's surrounded by Jesus and his disciples. But the problem is he says the men look like trees walking around. Now, I'm guessing this man was born blind, and so he had never actually seen a human being. And so my question to you is, if you had a person that was born blind, how would you describe what a person looked like to them if they had never seen one before? I don't know. There's different ways you could do it. You might say, well, human beings, they stand up vertically. They stand up and down. They're not like animals on all fours and more of a horizontal position. No, they're standing up vertically, and there's a top called a head, and there's a sort of a central point called a torso, and then there's like a base, a foundation, which are the legs. And if you were to maybe run your hands over a human being, well, you'd feel like a central trunk with arms and legs sort of branching off of it, and we call them limbs. And some humans are thinner, and some are thicker, and some are bushier on top, and some not as much. Okay, so I don't know, maybe you could see how if someone described a human being to you as a blind person that you'd never even seen a human before, it might sound similar to the way a person would describe trees to you. Trees have a central trunk with limbs branching off of them, and some are thinner, some are thicker, some they're bushy on top. So in this first stage of this miracle, the blind man can see, but he lacks discernment. He cannot yet tell the difference between humans and trees. And so in stage 2, Jesus fixes his discernment problem so that now he actually understands what he is looking at. Now, a skeptic might accuse Jesus of making a mistake here. He failed the first time, and so Jesus says, "Oh, wait, you mean you can't understand what you're seeing? Oh, wow, like I messed that up. Like, here, let me fix that real quick." Hey, but Jesus healed people the first time, all the time. Okay, so why all of a sudden would he have trouble performing a full miracle with this man? No. Jesus never did anything by accident. Okay? There was always a reason and a purpose behind everything he did. And I believe once you appreciate what happened leading up to this event, you'll realize Jesus did this to teach his disciples a very valuable and timeless lesson. And that is, there is a difference between seeing and understanding. Jesus wants his disciples to know, just because you see something with your eyes does not mean you have the discernment to know what you are looking at. And if they truly want to understand him and who he is and what it means for him to be with them, they need to not just see Jesus. They need to understand his nature and his mission and his purpose and what it means that he is right there with them in their midst. Now, this all started a few days earlier in Mark 8, verses 1 through 4. So let's read those verses, 1 through 4. In those days, when there was again a large crowd, and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, "I feel compassion for the people, because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they'll faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance." And the disciples answered him, "Where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people?" Now, this miracle may sound familiar because earlier in Mark chapter 6, Jesus fed 5,000 men along with their wives and children. Well, this miracle is almost identical, except here he's about to feed 4,000 men along with their wives and children. But there's a fundamental difference. It's like, okay, why does the Bible record both miracles? Like, why have a miracle about feeding 5,000 and then a miracle about feeding 4,000 if it's basically the same thing? There's a key difference. The feeding of the 5,000 was a Jewish crowd. This crowd is a Gentile crowd, which is astounding that a Jewish rabbi would have compassion for Gentiles. People that most Jews in the first century world felt absolute disdain for, couldn't care less about them. And yet Jesus says, man, I care about these Gentiles. They don't have anything to eat. They need somebody to take care of them. And there may be some symbolism in the fact that after he fed the Jews earlier, they had so much bread that they collected 12 baskets full, 12 representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And then here, as you keep reading in this miracle, he had so much left over, they collected 7 baskets full, 7 being the number of completion and the fullness of Jesus' salvation and presence in the world. Hidden within these miracles is the fact that Jesus did not just come to save the Jews. He came to save the Gentile nations too, which should remind us of God's promise to Abraham all the way back in Genesis chapter 12, that through his seed, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. With these 2 miracles, Jesus has proven himself to be the provider and the sustainer and the savior of the world. And yet the Pharisees come to him and listen to what they say in verses 11 through 13. The Pharisees came out and they began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. So the Pharisees wanted a sign from heaven, proving that he really is the Messiah and he really is from God. But the problem is they had already seen signs from Jesus. And even if they hadn't personally seen it, they had already heard about so many signs up to this point. Jesus had been healing the sick. He'd been casting out demons. He's been cleansing lepers. And he just provided bread for tens of thousands of people. But those signs were not proof enough for them. because they wanted like a specific kind of miracle. Maybe it says a sign from heaven, right? So give us some sort of cosmic miracle. I don't know what they were looking for. Change the position of the sun in the sky. I don't really know. But Jesus refuses to be a circus monkey, to perform for them and to do what they want, because he knows it doesn't matter what miracle he does. It will never be enough for these people. And that's because they have a problem. They see with their eyes, but they don't understand what they're seeing. They've already seen signs by Jesus, but they lack the discernment to know what they are looking at and what it means about who he really is. And the Pharisees are not the only ones with that problem, because let's keep reading verses 14 to 16. And they, the disciples, had forgotten to take bread with them. And they did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. And Jesus was giving orders to them, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. Now pause there, because when they get back into the boat to cross the Sea of Galilee, the disciples realize they forgot to bring enough bread for this journey. So when Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod, they think he's rebuking them for not having enough bread. They think he's saying, listen, since you guys dropped the ball here and didn't bring enough bread for our trip, be careful accepting bread from the Pharisees. If the Pharisees come and offer you bread, or someone from Herod's palace, if they offer you bread, don't take it from them. And of course, Jesus, he was not talking about literal leaven and literal bread. He's talking about the evil influence of the Pharisees and Herod. Actually, you know what he's talking about in this context? Be careful not to be like the Pharisees who see but do not understand. And ironically, as he's giving them that warning, they are under the influence of the leaven of the Pharisees. They are doing the very thing that he warned them about, because now they're discussing the bread, because they think they're being rebuked for it. Now, think about how unbelievable it is that they had just seen Jesus feed bread to 20,000 people, and now they're worried that they're not going to have enough bread for the 12 of them. Honestly, sometimes the misunderstanding of the disciples is harder to believe than Jesus' miracles. And I think that is the same today for us as our modern disciples. Okay, sometimes our unbelief is more unbelievable than Jesus' miracles. So look at what Jesus says to them in verses 17 through 21. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up? They said to him, 12. And when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said, 7. And he was saying to them, do you not yet understand? See, the disciples see, they don't understand. They have eyes. They saw Jesus provide for both the Jews and the Gentiles thousands of people with plenty of bread left to spare, and yet for some reason, after seeing all of that, they don't have the discernment to understand that Jesus will take care of them, and they don't ever have to worry about not having enough bread again with him in their presence. In the Lord's Prayer, back in Matthew 6, one of the things Jesus told us to pray to the Father for is to give us this day our daily bread. The disciples here are worried and anxious that they won't have enough daily bread when the provider of bread for the whole world is right there in the boat with them. Do you see why Jesus performed this miracle in 2 stages for the blind man? It's because that blind man was not the only blind man. The Pharisees were blind, and so were the disciples. He was trying to teach his disciples, it is not enough just to see. You need to understand. And I think this principle can help us so much as we partake every week of the Lord's Supper, because all of us can see with our eyes what we're doing. We see the bread and, we see the fruit of the vine and we see ourselves eating and drinking it. But the most important question is not do we see it, but do we understand what it means? And that's the benefit of having these short talks before the Lord's Supper, because every week we're trying to deepen our understanding so that we don't just see the Lord's Supper, but that we have the discernment to appreciate its value and the sacrifice that it represents. And for this morning, I just really want us to make sure that we don't have the same problem the disciples did here in Mark 8. I know that times are very tight financially right now. Everything is so much more expensive. And maybe we have been filled with worry and anxiety lately about not having enough daily bread. And while I sympathize, and I don't want to minimize, that as a fear that sometimes we face, I just want us to consider how odd it is to be partaking of the Lord's Supper, eating the bread of Jesus' body, which he gave for the salvation of the whole world, while also worrying about not having enough daily bread. And Paul said in Romans 8:32, he who did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? In other words, if Jesus gave us his body as the bread from heaven, why wouldn't he give us daily bread from earth? This memorial is a communion with each other as a church and also with Jesus himself. And he is right here in our midst. Like the disciples in Mark 8, Jesus is here with us in the boat, so we don't have to worry about not having enough daily bread to eat. May the weekly bread of the Lord's Supper be an antidote to our worry about daily bread. Jesus said about worry in Matthew 6, "Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat? Or what will we drink? Or what will we wear for clothing? For Gentiles or unbelievers," right? They eagerly seek all these things, but your heavenly Father knows you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. This morning, as we seek his kingdom and his righteousness first by taking the weekly bread of the Lord's Supper, may God grant us eyes, not just to see, but to understand that he'll take care of our daily bread too.